objectives about promoting interoperability, reducing semantic assets, and raising awareness of the importance of meta and data management by proposing a semantic definition and solutions on core concepts and vocabularies. Next slide, please. So you are familiarized with the first our solutions, the core vocabularies and the application profile, but here we would like to draw the attention that of the ADMS that has not been tackled for quite a long time. It is one of the application. It belongs to the category of the application profiles, which we're going to discuss today, along with ADMS-AP. So in this, having said that, next slide, please. I pass the floor to Berta to guide you a bit to have a recap on the ADMS and ADMS-AP history in order to have a catch up on what was done in the previous years and what are the challenges we are going to tackle today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavlina. So the first thing I would like to do with you is to indeed look back to what ADMS and how it has been defined and worked out quite a while ago. So it's for one of the earliest activities of the SEMIC action. And in that area, you see it started with ADMS. Everything that's above the timeline is in the course of the SEMIC action that has happened. And in that context, the notion of asset data management schema, of asset data management was raised as a topic, and that has led to a vocabulary, which in some years later, after the first version, has been published as a W3C note. In parallel and in that activity, of course, there are certain controlled vocabularies being defined, and they have been published still under the maintenance of the SEMIC action, and they got a minor update in the few years afterwards on that. And then out of ADMS as vocabulary itself, there has been an ADMS-AP application profile being defined, a more specific version of ADMS, and that got a major revision some years later after. And that activity that you see here is somehow stopped, or there's no certain new activity since the last 5 years. So this is something that we now want to bring together, and this is the topic of today, where we want to discuss on 3 elements. First, on ADMS as a vocabulary, and you see that we cross the lines between the 2 organizations, SEMIC, the European Commission, and W3C, and then we want to propose ADMS as a broad vocabulary, and that's the first part of it. Then we will shortly dive into what the future, how we see the future of the controlled vocabularies, what our idea is there, and then have an open discussion on ADMS-AP as an application profile. So this is the goal and the activities that we see today in the webinar. If we look back to the ADMS vocabulary, and then if you look to this note, so this is the URL. If you still want to look at it, maybe colleague William can paste it in the chat. That this is the original version as published on W3C as a note. And if you read on that document in that vocabulary, then you will see that this is tightly connected with DCAT. However, as we know, DCAT has got recently many new versions. DCAT 2, DCAT 3 is upcoming, and this activity raises, of course, questions how this is coupled and what we can go forward on that. And you know as well, this is a note, and this is maybe on the status on the. So there is the next thing, of course, how to use it. on the usage, if we look to the usage on the different activities of the vocabulary itself, and you see that it's mostly term-based and mostly as expected in the context of DCAT or DCAT-AP. And so 4 common properties that you will find back in this area are ADMS identifier, ADMS status, ADMS sample, and ADMS version nodes. They appear in W3C DCAT and DCAT-AP. And this is a vocabulary usage, a term-based usage. And so it's not in the whole of the notion of a profile usage. If we look a bit deeper into the text, the current node text, then you will see that the definitions that are given to assets and so on ADMS, that they are based on FRBR, so functional requirements for bibliographic records, and that they differentiate or are different from those of DCAT. And this can raise questions. Is this the same? Is this not the same? Is this broader? Is this narrower? And that is a challenge on the usage of those terms, how to fit them. So this is a question and a challenge that we observe from the current node. Another thing that you, of course, experience if you look to the node is, well, if I have questions like these, saying, can it fit, can it not fit, where should we address those? And then if you look further on, then you see that this node is the result of a working group at W3C, but this working group is not anymore active. So we are looking for, can we provide an active community where such questions can be raised and then can be approved. And at the same time, if we look from the SEMIC perspective, yeah, if we want to provide a coherent look and feel and experience, can we provide for ADMS the same trusted experience as for the core vocabularies and application profiles? So this is kind of the challenge of the current node, where to go with it as a community or as the experience of reading of the document. If we look, and this is another element, and then into what is the purpose of ADMS, and then I copied the descriptive texts on the scope that is related to ADMS, and I highlighted elements that are important according to the vocabulary in there. And then one element is there that is a vocabulary to describe semantic assets which are listed as or enumerated as highly reusable metadata, for instance, schema, generic data models, reference data, code list, taxonomies, etc. So this is the, let's say, the core around where asset, the notion, the core notion in ADMS is built, and there's a connection with DCAT historically being set. Although it wants to distinguish itself from a normal usage of DCAT. And so some differences in expectations and tries to capture those when you have a collection of semantic assets. Now, that scope has certain challenges, and in the first place, yeah, we know that DCAT evolves, and if we want to maintain this connection, then how we are going to create a new version of ADMS each time that there's a new version of DCAT, like we do for DCAT-AP, and we follow it. Is ADMS strongly connected with DCAT-AP or not? What is the profile it based upon? So we have this kind of scope as a profile, raises quite some questions. What is the future of this vocabulary as such? So maintenance as well definition of the scope. What is our proposal for today? And that's the thing that we want to discuss with you, is that on the first place that we want to propose ADMS as a broad vocabulary. in the sense that it fits the current usage, namely there are terms being reused in different contexts. And we want to make the vocabulary stand on its own, in its own right, so that it can be used and maintained as that. And as a consequence, that the profiling aspect is moved to a real application profile, if needed or open. So that's the third part of the after the break discussion, where to go with that. So I first want to propose this element. And so what is our proposal? In short, again, is to make ADMS a broad vocabulary, broader than it is, not a profile, but just a vocabulary under the maintenance of SEMIC in collaboration with W3C. So we maintain the URIs, we keep it as is. It's only that the maintenance and the editorial efforts, the questions of the community can be addressed to a place where somebody picks it up, and this will be the SEMIC community. What is the changes that we foresee is one, decoupling from DCAT, so not describing it as a profile of DCAT, but as a vocabulary its own right. So essentially formally removing the subclass of relationships. This implies a bit of an editorial rewrite, reorganization, and a few minor changes that come from this decoupling that we have spotted into it, or usages that we have spotted that we can take into account in the same area as decoupling. So that is what is the proposal. What is our impact? And then that's the reason why we looked into this is as well as proposal, is that essentially we can keep the main definitions as is. They do not mention DCAT stuff, except that they are subclass of. So if we remove that, we become broader, but we can maintain the definition. We can restrict the vocabulary itself, ADMS, to the terms in the namespace. That is the first as a side effect as well. We can decouple ADMS as vocabulary, as maintenance, as a vocabulary from the DCAT evolution. So that's good. So editorial effort, it becomes more stable on that. So it's not reflecting on that. But anyhow, we can add as a historic reference the usage of ADMS as a profile, as an example. That's in our proposal available. So in short, there's actually zero impact on the current use. Maybe it even is more usable, becomes more usable even in a certain sense, because it's in a trusted environment, placed in a more active maintenance, placed as vocabulary, so that the community can rely and better use it. So this is the proposal.
Are any comments here or questions from the floor? Anyone who has a question, a worry?
Matthias, raise his hand.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, Matthias.
As always, I have some questions. So DCAT has introduced DCAT resource since ADMS was introduced, which means that DCAT now has more flexibility. With the DCAT 3, there is also the version properties and series and other new mechanisms that widen the usage of DCAT.
Yes.
So that you could argue then that the need for the ADMS has been smaller, or maybe it needs to be redefined somehow. One of the things that I've been thinking about is the role of the distributions in DCAT, where we are assuming that the distributions are variants or representations of the same resource, or the format distinction. Is that one of the distinctions that we would make on ADMS, or what do you see as the main benefit of keeping ADMS? Would it, or what is the main differences that make it valid as a separate vocabulary?
Okay, so this is a good question that is might be raised. In the first place, I have been focused on keeping the current vocabulary as it is being used and bring it in a more trusted and coherent place. That's not yet an answer to your question on whether it is applicable or not. But so this is the first thing. Now, if we look towards the usability of it and say, okay, what is the extra merits of this vocabulary? Then you see indeed that certain terms get deprecated by the use in context of DCAT. Everything there's, for instance, as well, ADMS next and last and pref that exist into it. And explicitly in the DCAT vocabulary, they have say we created in our own namespace, in the DCAT namespace, the corresponding ones, and we deprecate the use, or we don't recommend the use of the ADMS ones or alternatives. There are many others. So that reduces, of course, the usability and the need for ADMS. So in that sense, the question comes, and it's to semantic assets. If we come back to that word, because that's the thing that is remaining of the vocabulary. If we want to maintain information about semantic assets, and if we could define that quite well, that's supposing that we could define that quite well, then ADMS as vocabulary could be a place where we make this more precise. If not, I expect that this vocabulary gets now a new revision, fixed and stable, and it will be slowly degrading in use of not adding new additional information into it. That's my expectation a bit. Is that clear, Matthias?
Matthias?
Yes, I understand the perspective. The only thing I'm wondering is whether we should make a big effort into transforming this into a separate thing if we foresee that it will be more and more obsolete. Is it worth it? That's the question I'm asking. Why not? Is there a value of semantic assets that is not just using Dublin core? Maybe with a combination of has version properties that correspond to asset distribution or something similar. What is the added value of having the class asset and asset distribution? But maybe this discussion goes too far now.
That's actually, it's part, we had actually planned this kind of discussion in the context of ADMS-AP, because the question over there is even more urgent or stringent of what it is. For the vocabulary itself, you can defend saying we want to maintain that we don't get that links, and this is clear, we end in the right, the namespaces and the URIs are still stable. So we maintain on that, this is clear. On the application profile, there, this two layering, ADMS as historic profile and ADMS-AP as a separate profile, that discussion is even more important. And then the story is really sitting there.
But we discussed that in the second part of the webinar.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I just want to mention also prof. Would be nice to compare it with prof, the profiles vocabulary.
Yeah. But as you will show you what is in the content of ADMS namespace, and that's the next slides.
Okay.
You will see that there are few elements that, well, they are not typically in prof, they are more in terms of assets and the usage on that.
Okay, so move on.
Okay, if no other questions, then
there's a question in the chat about Narosa. No, Mantas.
Mantas. Whether it's possible to mark ADMS as deprecated.
Yeah, okay, so we could consider as well to make things deprecated, but the impact of that is bigger than you actually want to do. For instance,
it might be an option for later on, If we find out that no one actually uses it anymore, then that would be the time to deprecate it. But at this point in time, we're not at that point. But it's a good suggestion.
No. It's a suggestion where that you see that happening slowly. But for instance, our DCAT W3C depends on it. So it means that there must be a new revision of W3C DCAT in order to safely deprecate without impacting everybody's space. For instance, that's critical on that.
William?
That question, William, is actually the one as well we have in the last part of the webinar. So we come to that one. Okay.
Ana Rosa.
Okay, so that's a good question, Anna. That's why semantic assets versus any asset. So this is the history part of it. So this in the history of the initialization of this vocabulary, they focused on semantic assets and then on vocabularies, application profiles, taxonomies, etc. So that was the focus of the area. However, indeed, the word assets indicates something broader. And this is where the further definition allows it even to be broader. And this is the kind of the challenge. Is it broader or narrower definition and so on? So in principle, if we strike out now the removal of the semantic out of it, many of the, let's say, of the properties of the notion of asset can be applied in a broader context. So this is a challenging part of it. Is it narrower or broader? That's the reason why we as well propose it to focus it on the vocabulary itself, to make it, let's say, easily reusable in that context if you want.
Georgia has a comment that ADMS defines asset as a class.
Yeah. So asset is a class indeed, and we see it in 3 slides.
Okay.
So what we have done, to give you the proposal over, we prepared this work already so that it is, as it is kind of a recap of revamping and bringing the things together in modern maintenance. You have a new vocabulary, ADMS Vocabulary. William, you can share the link as well. And it is essentially constructed in 3 parts: a motivation and introduction and motivation, where you find essentially the story that we did before up to this point written out. Then the vocabulary, which is scoped only to the terms within the namespace, and then an example, as historic use of ADMS in the context of DCAT. So that's the 3-layer section of the proposal. You can explore it yourself, and there's a new picture into it, and this picture actually shows you only the terms that are in the namespace of ADMS. So to highlight this much more better and to make it more precise on what it is. And you see that there are 4 classes, my apologies. Assets distribution, asset repository, similar as in DCAT, so the 3-layer structure, and ADMS identifier, which is often used as well. And then there are some properties that can be freely used. Last, next, pref, and there's translation, there's sample, there's a identifier that points to ADMS identifier, there's status, representation technique, supported schema, interoperability level, and included assets. In short, so this is the overview. We have 4 classes, with the URIs and the definitions. And as you see, we've just copied the definitions as is at this moment from the historic, from the notes. So nothing changed on that in principle. So if you have been using the classes, they stay as the same use. And similarly, the same thing happens for the properties, where we have all these properties with their historic definition. If we look to them, and this could be an additional action, is that we look to rewriting the definitions according to our guidelines that we have for good practices of definitions. So that could be an additional, but so far this has not been done, just to make the correspondence one-to-one for everyone. Given that, there are two issues in GitHub, it's issue 3 and 4 that we want to raise, and that came out of this work. And if we look a little bit deeper, is that we observed that ADMS sample was used or is used in DCAT-AP with range DCAT distribution. However, in the context of ADMS, it was set to the range ADMS assets. In ADMS, it is specified that you can be both an ADMS asset as an ADMS asset distribution, and that they can be connected with each other. But anyhow, ADMS asset was defined as a subclass of DCAT dataset, and that would create, of course, kind of confusion and usage and so on. The proposal is to lift this and to make this property range open and point to RDF resource. Are there any comments on this? So to broaden it further, and so that we can keep on the use and we match the reuse as is.
So this is a backward compatible change. Anything that's already in the range of ADMS asset of sample will still be valid.
Yeah. So, thank you, Matthias, to help the voting.
Any objections to this? Then we'd like to hear them. I see only 2 plus 1s. Don't see any objections. Once we'll agree. Looker has no opinion.
I come to your question, Elias. That's
Looker is +1. Jim is +1. I don't see any negatives. So we can assume that this is agreed.
Okay, good. The question on the asset catalog that is called in ADMS is called asset repository, the catalog itself. The catalog has a name and label, asset repository. So I propose that this, I think, Elias, that this is your question. Is this gone? No, it's not gone. It still is there. It is not any more connected as stated as a sub-property of a subclass of DCAT catalog. But you can still, in your profile, add that one. So you can still do that. So the terms, all the terms are there. We should not have forgotten any of them. And this one is a typo that we observed when looking into the RDF serialization. We found out that there was the URI ADMS scheme agency, whereas in the HTML document it is schema agency. I did some search and surround. Most everybody of usages point and use schema agency, so the HTML as normative. So we propose to take the HTML URI as the normative URI and place it everywhere. Align it. That is the proposal on this one.
But did you find out that there's no one using the one from the RDF serialization?
I didn't found, or at least the places where I looked, I didn't found usages of that. So I might be not looked everywhere, but I have not seen anything.
So as far as you know,
yeah,
using ADMS schema agency is following common practice.
Yeah.
So if anyone knows of situations where people use the scheme agency, then we'll really want to hear that.
Yeah.
But in the absence of that, I think the proposal is to use the current practice schema agency. Are there any objections to that? Any support for that? Yes, supports. Any questions about it? If people have questions? The idea to include in the RDF serialization a same as?
We could do that. That's an alternative that we could do, but in sense of, let's say, from now on the usage with schema agency, we can add a deprecation note or let's say something like that on that one. If
yeah, so I think the answer to Peter is that we are not changing the URI, but no. We're recommending to use the one that is current practice. Stronger had a comment that there are some usages of scheme agency. Need to check how many and how important, but indeed we are not going to delete or the old URI, but maybe it's an idea to link the old one to the new one.
Yeah, we can do that. So because this was a typo, you see that it's in different places. Probably it was a typo, or it wasn't the idea in historically that was scheme, and then it changed to schema by somebody. I don't know.
Ludger Rinches says he is in favor of deprecating, but still having same as from the typo to the one that we use as the normative URI.
Okay, so what we can do is we can add an extra, let's say, in handling of it, and that we note and that we keep this one, but forward it to the metadata around it that this is deleted.
So in the RDF serialization, both will be there.
We can do that.
There will be a link from the E1 to the A1. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. That's good.
Good. Let's do it that way.
Sobor saying thinks that it's not worth propagating because the usage of scheme agency is not in important cases. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Sobor is also in agreement with that last proposal to keep them both, but deprecate one and point to the one that is the normative one.
Okay, good. Good. Thank you very much. So essentially, this was our first area, so I put the break up, but we're going to the next thing. So the goal is, and I just summarize quickly back to our this thing is so that we have now prepared ADMS as a broad vocabulary where we continue the experience in the URIs of W3C under maintenance of the SEMIC community. This is what we do.
And one question, Bert, you said earlier, one of the objectives was to have this a place where people can ask questions.
Yeah.
That place will be the GitHub?
Yes, there will be GitHub of the SEMIC ADMS. So William, can you paste it again? So it will be the GitHub of the ones here behind.
And so any question that people have, any comment on ADMS as the vocabulary can be done as an issue in the GitHub for
indeed.
ADMS. Okay.
Indeed. Okay.
Anna, Rosa raised her hand.
Okay, Anna.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, but I am stuck at the beginning, so I cannot understand very well. Sorry. The overall situation. So we have a DCAT vocabulary which depends on ADMS vocabulary, but also we have ADMS vocabulary that depends on DCAT vocabulary. It's like the definition of the definition is quite. I don't understand it very well how it can happen. It's a circular definition, no?
Well, it's not circular. It's actually there are properties defined in ADMS, and in particular additional. Where are the lists? Go to these ones. Sorry, these usage. So in ADMS, in the context of ADMS, as describing semantic assets, there have some additional properties being defined that 10 years back, by the initiation of the vocabulary, were found valuable for describing semantic assets. And those four, here, take this four here, were found very valuable, namely to identify it in different ways and in a descriptive way. So not just by a string, but in something more constructed way that you know from which agency this identifier comes, etc. A status, a notion, a sample notion, and version notes. So these were all things that were felt valuable in the context of describing semantic assets. You have to know at that point in time, DCAT-1 existed, was parallel developed with ADMS. So it's a bit of a parallel discussion that were ongoing, and we have to focus on DCAT-1, the first DCAT.
But from my point of view, what we need to see clearly is which is the added value of DCAT, which is the the added value of ADMs, and how they what is the sense of their parallel existence or no. I mean, from my point of view, as you know, ADMS-AP 2.0 is used by Join Up for the Federation for Join Up Solutions. So asset, for me, ADMS has sense if it describes any kind of assets, and then you can create application for profiles for the different types of assets, semantic assets, interoperability solutions, data sets, or whatever. But in that sense, ADMS would be like a general vocabulary for describing assets and their repositories. And then you have the sub vocabularies depending on these generic vocabularies for semantic assets, for the data sets, for interoperability solutions, or for whatever specific asset you want to model. But this kind of, I am using in ADMS properties from sub vocabularies. I understand that this is as it is, but I don't understand why they should be
okay.
That way.
So that's the goal that we want to achieve as well here, is that we try to the reason of decoupling it. Lifts our mind to say, okay, ADMS as a vocabulary, as a collection of terms, exists on its own right. Whether or not it has a big future or a small future, I leave it in the middle. So this is the thing. So what we want to make it now is it stands on it in its own right. It has clear semantics, each term that is enlisted in each class, each property, and you can use it to build up your other vocabularies like DCAT as a core vocabulary. And same that we do with core vocabularies, we point to identifier if we have more complex identifiers to want to list. So this is kind of
to remove all the properties coming from DCAT, no?
Yes, we want to remove the dependencies entirely from DCAT. So that's the reason why you see this new picture here, this picture has no DCAT into it. It is only ADMS and RDFS resource and cost concept to have the basic notions of structuring of information.
But also in the properties, because I see a property from ADMS assets, which is DCAT keyword, for instance. If I am not blind.
Yeah, so that one, those keywords and so on, that's the question. If we see it, that I would see more as a profiling, then you put this in the context of your profile. You still can use the word keywords into it in the context and say, okay, I shop it from DCAT keywords. So we put the profile aspect outside of ADMS.
Okay, so we should remove in this last version, this DCAT keyword will be removed from the asset definition. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So this is the only picture, and this is the picture that is connected to the namespace, and that's then makes everything to the boundary box is the namespace essentially. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what's in and then you can build it up.
Yeah. Understood, and now it makes sense. Thank you very much.
Okay, no problem, Ana Rosa.
Then I can just come back to our earlier discussion about the two schema and schema agency. I think there is a consensus developed that will just deprecate the old one, the one that we don't think is the right one. So the one with the E, the scheme agency, and then do not use same as, because that has all kinds of implications, but use equivalent property.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah,
I think that's, and well, Georgia's thing is not even need for an equivalent property.
If you redirect, as one suggested, that URI to the other one, you don't need in a certain way.
It's hard to redirect in the sense that they are hashed URIs. So redirection.
Okay. So then, yeah, you have to deprecate it, and then.
Equivalent property.
Yeah, obviously.
Okay.
If
so
you cannot redirect, yeah, obviously you have to apply another solution.
Yeah. And then again, Italo has the question of whether it's the duplication between ADMS and DCAT is necessary. At least I think we'll get to that. The ADMS-AP in relation to DCAT-AP, and I think that we come back to that in the second part.
Yeah, indeed. Then, so what we want to have now is that we have the agreement with you that we have a broad vocabulary scoped to the namespace. That's the only goal that we want to achieve in phase one.
Some work suggests, Ana Rosa is an agreement, to have something in the introduction of the ADMS that points to DCAT and explains what the relation between the two is. So that people can actually make a decision on what fits their needs better.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, let's do that. Okay.
Good.
That's for this part. So we're going into the controlled vocabularies. Go ahead.
Indeed. In the controlled vocabularies, so as I pointed out at the start of ADMS, there have been a certain number of controlled vocabularies being defined. They got a minor revision into it a few years back, and our perspective is, and I saw that Willem was on the call as well, is to collaborate with the Publications Office to move the management and the operational activities on those controlled vocabularies to the EU vocabularies area. But this is our objective to do. And actually, this is happening to a certain extent already, the basis. So what we have today is, maybe some of you might know them, might not know them. In that aspect, we think, bringing them to the EU vocabularies will probably give them more higher exposure and more usability as well. Then the maintenance will be probably better and not a more ad hoc basis. And what we have seen is that already in the context of DCAT-AP, where we were using the ADMS controlled vocabularies, they were requested to transfer in the maintenance to the EU vocabularies. So there was already this activity ongoing, and now we want to do it, let's say, more active and then in one batch. If you want to see the current state and the full list, this is one file at the moment. That's the list thing. And if you look into detail into it, we have one that actually is transferred, status. It's actually today dataset status. There is the notion of the asset type that could be merged with the dataset type to be investigated. There is the notion of representation technique that could be merged with now the file types. So whether logical or non-logical, you can debate on it. And then there are ones that are mentioned as well, sometimes in DCAT-AP, change type and license type. They can be transferred as well. I think that's the expectation. And there was a few that were probably not known too much to people. Interoperability level, which are the EIF layers, and the publisher type, kind of a grouping of organizations. So probably those were very less known, but we still think they could be transferred.
Georgia has a question about the maintenance of those URIs.
Yeah. And then, so we still are in the discussion, Willem. So this is not decided on it, but the usual practice is that the original URIs are maintained in the sense that there will be, we will put a forward from us to the new ones. So we maintain the Perl.ADMS as SEMIC, we will put a forward to the new ones. And then typically in the metadata, there is a reference as alternative URI or something like this. I don't know how it's called. Willem, you could probably give it better, or see also something similar like that. So typically
in the case of the Perl word, you can do a redirect.
Yeah.
Which they were already redirected to something else, but then they were going to, now they're going to redirect to the EU vocabularies.
Indeed, yeah. Okay. So today they point to a file and then you have to dig into it, to this big file. So we want to give them to each individual so that you get all the power and the maintenance power of the EU vocabularies that comes with it, that you can ask questions, that we can evolve on it, etc.
But the answer to Georgia's question is yes, these URIs will still be maintained.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And there is a question from Ludger, but I think that we're going to handle that later, whether the AP will force properties to use these vocabularies, but that's a question for the AP that we're doing after the break.
Yeah, that's indeed, that's for the AP. The AP is different. And so this is saying these vocabularies, so on. So what I invite on this, on the vocabularies, so it becomes, yeah, you already answered from Georgia. So the old will become secondary. So we will recommend the use of the EU vocabularies. So in all the documentation, there will be pointing to the EU vocabularies, the maintained URIs as the main ones. But if you look to them now, as this activity now, this webinar initiates some activity from your side, have a look to this list and see if something can be improved or could be improved. So because we have not yet done the transfer, we have not initiated everything. So it could be helpful to do this initialization with more or quality reviewed code lists.
On those, I still have a couple of points, but I think they're the general points. Why do we have ADMS and what is the scope of ADMS? And I think that warrants probably a separate discussion after we've done this activity to see whether we need to keep ADMS alive and for what.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions about the controlled vocabularies, about the approach? about the redirections?
So
We
the
have a
planning
link
and the
to
announcement
we
on
have a
this.
link to them so people can have a look at them if people
Yeah.
weren't familiar with them.
Yeah, so William can paste it. So the planning, we will inform you about the planning and the steps further on. Where we are with together with Publications Office. That will be decided, and the planning on that. It's not yet fixed.
Okay, so then we'll have 5-minute break, and then we'll get back at 2 o'clock.
Sorry, Max. Maybe I can just just to confirm that we are very much willing to support, of course, the SEMIC community, and also yeah, to see together how we can take over the maintenance of these controlled vocabulary. So I'm sorry we were not able to arrange this before this meeting, but so we have my colleague Denis de Chandon. He has already sent an email, and so I think we can follow this up after the meeting.
Yeah, and as you have seen, William, this is kind of the natural trend that we do, so it's nothing, yeah, shocking into the list.
So we'll have a break now, and we'll be back.
That was the plan. Yeah,
At 2 o'clock. Okay, shall we continue?
I can do, yes.
Yes, there is a comment from Matthias in the chat.
Yes, so just to note on that, I observed that too, indeed. They get disconnected because of that choice, of the current choice. And that's the good moment, or maybe that's a good moment here, is saying what is the future of the vocabulary and how we have to invest into it. Because that is our next thing of the, if we look from a profile, from a user perspective, we're going, for what are we using ADMS? And then this vocabulary can grow, ADMS as a vocabulary, to be used in a particular usage context as well. And so that could be an additional element that could assist to it. But I think that would be good that we then have what is the future of, let's say, the profile, of have some steps towards that. That will help us to make that decision. But you can note it down in GitHub. It's no problem to note this observation in GitHub. So this is our next topic. What is the future of the profile? And as you see, there have been actually 3 profiles, although there's ADMS-AP 1 and 2. So ADMS as itself was originally defined as a profile of DCAT. ADMS-AP 1 was an extension of that profile to be more precise and to be in the context of the first, at the point in time that JoinUp started. This activity started as well and is connected. So ADMS-AP1 is strongly connected with the initialization of JoinUp at that point phase.
That was the repository of semantic assets at JoinUp.
Yeah, indeed. If we go one step further, and it's today, and ADMS-AP as it is today, this is the picture, and this would come close to a DCAT profile or a DCAT-AP profile if you deep dive into it, because version 2 addressed an additional use case in the context of JoinUp and this catalog of semantic assets, to be able to easily merge that catalog with dataoper.eu. And so in order to do that, what has happened is that from version 1 to version 2, all subclass relationships were materialized. So if you look into the profile of DCAT-AP version 2 today, then you will see very little ADMS URIs, but a lot of DCAT URIs. And that is because of this change that has happened in order to merge them more easily. So note that this has happened even before DCAT-2 was present. So this is activity version 2 of ADMS-AP is actually with regard to DCAT-1. There was maybe already ongoing discussions for DCAT-2, but it was not at that point present, so that you have to know. The profile you find on a repository ADMS-AP in our on the GitHub space. So if we just look to the activity that we just decided to make ADMS as vocabulary a broad vocabulary on the current ADMS-AP 2, then actually there's no impact except maybe some editorial impact. For instance, the topic that we just discussed before on the controlled vocabularies, if they were become active, then it would be maybe of interest to replace the references to the right ones in the EU vocabularies to point immediately directly to the right to the new URIs. So this is editorial mostly, but nevertheless, of course, this raises the question, this change that we do in adopting ADMS as a broad vocabulary, what is the motivation for ADMS-AP and where we go forward. Anyhow, if we look to ADMS-AP today as it is, and we consider it as a DCAT profile, then we are in the context of, okay, now we have DCAT 2, DCAT 3, how we're going to represent it, how we're going to place it, how we're going to manage it. And as a consequence of that, in order to how to manage it, ADMS-AP, we have to ask ourselves, what is the use case, what is the scope that ADMS-AP addresses? That is the question, and that comes what Matthias raised in the beginning, what Ana Rosa as well raised. So this is about where is the scope, where we want to go with a profile of ADMS. Which direction do we want to go with it? If we look for join-up, the case of join-up as one of the users of ADMS-AP, then we see that in that context of join-up, there are notions defined collections, solutions, releases. And there are some mappings. So on the right-hand side, you see the 4. On the left-hand side, you see 3. And this is still with DCAT 1, where you only have the notion of dataset and distribution. Today, we have DCAT resource as abstract notion, and we have dataset, data service, dataset series. So there are more notions in the DCAT vocabulary, and maybe we have to do a different binding in that area. So this is opening up what is the use case for join up. So we invest more in this area. Do we want to go forward for collection solutions and releases to manage and to express that better and more natively in DCAT as a profile? There are different options now at the table. Another use case is a very native use case. It's very really tailored to the original ADMS as a profile, and so it's a collection of semantic assets as it stands, with additional information in Italy. So schema gov.it IT from Italy. And then you see exactly ADMS as it was defined in the definition of the scope as a collection of semantic assets. So these are the two use cases where we actively have knowledge about. So we leave now the floor to you in which direction to go. Maybe Georgia, I know you're on the call. You can say something about this. So why this is important or why this was useful. I don't know if somebody from JoinUp is on the call, but Elias, so maybe Elias can say something here.
We have also to raise the hands, Matthias and Italo.
Yeah, but maybe let's give the floor to Georgia and
Yes.
Elias, and then.
Yeah, I just prepared 3 slides, really 3 slides on that. If I'm allowed to share them.
Wait.
Yeah, I can share, I think.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen now? Yes, okay. Yeah, indeed, you are right, Bart. We use the ADMS and the ADMS-AP because, well, we started using it some years ago because we wanted to produce fair semantic assets. So if semantic assets are to be fair, are to be, first of all, discoverable, and so we needed to provide metadata and to discover these semantic assets. And yeah, we wanted to create a national catalog of semantic assets. I would say now that is assets, including semantic assets, because we now have schema.gov.it that includes ontologies, controlled vocabularies, and a schema of APIs. And in order to do also automatic harvesting operations of semantic assets probably published by public institutions, we had to have like an agreement on a metadata profile. So what we saw is that controlled vocabularies in our country are data sets modeled using SCOS data model, and so they are data sets. And so if they are data sets, then we have DCAT-AP, obviously in our country, IT. So for the ontology, we decided to use, after we did a big analysis at that time, also with the PhD student of La Sapienza University of Rome, we analyzed many metadata profiles of other catalogs, quite famous as well, like Love or Bioportal, just to mention a few of them. And we also look at ADMS and ADMS-AP. And so we came up with a solution to extend ADMS-AP for the Italian case, okay, in order to describe semantic assets and to add in these semantic assets a set of attributes that are typical of, for example, ontologies, like a preferred prefix, like the key classes defined within the ontology and something like that. So in essence, what we have done is we defined the semantic asset as an extension of the DCAT-AP data set that we have, because it is mainly based on DCAT and DCAT-AP essentially. Yeah, you can also, clicking on URI, you can also visualize the ontology, the related ontology that we realized some years ago using HTML, okay? So I think that the lessons learned are the main lessons, and I think it's the most interesting thing that I can say after all this long discussion today. I tell you the truth, originally we were quite skeptical in saying that semantic assets are data sets, okay? And we said, well, are we sure? Even if I look at an ontology can be defined as data describing other data, okay? It's because it's a semantic metadata in a certain way, okay? But then over time, we realized that instead of all this discussion that we heard so far, coupling DCAT and DCAT-AP with the ADMS-AP, and obviously in this Italian extension, was quite convenient for a variety of reasons. So first of all, we could extend data sets and the notion of data set with our specific properties to provide metadata for our ontologies, for example, okay? Secondly, people know very well DCAT-AP and DCAT-AP, especially people working in data, okay? So if we produce data models for those data, people may be familiar also with the metadata of this data model if they already know DCAT and DCAT-AP. And also, I tell you the truth, we can inherit from DCAT a variety of properties that are quite useful. I mentioned, for example, the classification of data sets in themes that we also use to classify ontologies and semantic assets, so that we can also have like cross searches between data and data set that uses that data model, okay? So this simplifies things. And to be honest, this also simplifies things in the implementation of the national catalog, because harvesting mechanisms are simplified because there are very many overlapping, let me say, properties between the metadata of ontologies and data sets, like controlled vocabularies, as I mentioned before. So we really simplified the things for the contractor who actually implemented so far the schema.gov.it catalog. So this is more or less what we realized in this experience. So yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy also that we defined our model with our URIs, okay? Because now we have our own semantic self-defined, because if you are going to change something here, this can be a trouble. Take into account that Italy is still based on DCAT-AP IT version 1 of DCAT, so we don't have these also issues at the moment that you are mentioning about moving to different version of DCAT. We will have it probably in the future, but what I can say is that it works, and I mean, it works also in practice, and we are quite happy about that.
We had Matthias and Italo. Matthias?
Yeah, so I wrote this before in the chat. I just pasted it. So I just want to mention that it seems like right now we have matured a bit as a community, because we are talking about application profiles and vocabularies in a little bit of a new way. Before, we have had a mixture of the both. ADMS was both a vocabulary and an application profile at the same time. Yeah. And now you're arguing that these should be separate. A vocabulary is a set of classes and properties that can be reused in other settings rather freely, while an application profile is a specific intended use case where you can use the vocabulary at hand, maybe in combination with other properties and classes from other vocabularies.
Correct.
And this is now becoming, this is not done this way. If you look at DCAT, DCAT is actually both a vocabulary and an allocation profile. And the same goes in principle with the current thing we call DCAT-AP. Mainly it's an application profile, but it also introduces a few more specific properties, very few, but still they are there. And it seems to me that this transition is taking place more or less now, the way, and it maybe should be acknowledged and help those that are perhaps not, has been part of this process for a long time and look back at the vocabularies or this application profiles and confuse, what is this? Is this an application profile? Is it a vocabulary? Why do we call these different things? So just as a reflection here, maybe we should clarify this somewhere, that we are defining ADMS from this perspective, where we are talking about things differently.
That's correct. Okay, Italo.
Hello, everybody. Maybe I should introduce myself first of all. Yeah, I'm, let's say, the new web architect about JoinUp. I'm starting this assignment at the beginning of January. But yes, I'm an expert Drupal developer, been building web application in open source environment for decades. So I've been going through this semantic context for a while, weeks, months. I've been looking at all the webinars. I'm analyzed the JoinUp data model is ADMS AP, so I've come with some conclusions and some vision now. Okay, we do have JoinUp strongly adopting ADMS architecture, data model, ADMS AP for these semantic assets. So it is defining collection, solution, distribution, and also there is this introduction of releases that with distribution can attach to solution. Okay. And is defining, okay, it's complying with the ADMS semantic data model. I've learned that some ADMS AP was built 10 years ago to map, to store semantic assets. Then it was expanded to also store something else, something more expanded, widened as a concept. So legal concepts, licenses, whatever. So it's storing interoperable solution as a wide concept. So not just software, but also solutions, not software solution. Okay. But JoinUp is now evolving, has been evolving as a platform. It looks, is not supposed to store, first of all, it looks that it's going in a direction that it shouldn't store, it shouldn't become the source of truth, because the ICT world is evolving. Also, we are facing the adoption of this open source software catalog, and the JoinUp goal is for sure not to be a library of open source solution, but a reference, no? Maybe a a distributed catalog reference of open source solution that reside still there in the Git repositories. So the ADMS data model looks a little bit misaligned to me with the evolution of the, let's say, for sure, in the perspective of using JoinUp as a federated catalog of open source software solutions. And this vision is getting some consensus. For instance, we are looking at the Italian solution of Developers Italia. They're using this metadata file that is public YAML that reside in the repository. So is just fetched and let's say mirrored. Okay. Should we really translate it in ADMS AP? Not really, in my opinion, because still the ADMS AP is a kind of proprietary format from the European Commission, and maybe we should kind of align what is been created by the open source software community. But still, ADMS AP is the way to stay for still storing interoperable solution in JoinUp, in my opinion. We have some issues with the data storage where that was implemented in JoinUp that has been built with triples. This giving any added value in JoinUp and introducing just a lot of complexity. So hopefully we're going to simplify that, still keeping the ADMS AP model, data model. I've seen there is an open issue from the previous architect, Sander, that was asking for the Git repo URL field that I think is still missing. That could be an added value that I don't see in this profile at the moment. And yes, it looks, I mean, for me, is a kind of source of perplexion to detach from DCAT. I'm not a semantic expert, so I'm sorry for that, but I understand what it means, because in my understanding, ADMS-AP was a kind of fork, was a kind of parallel profile. It took meaning, no? It kept meaning for being connected with DCAT, but if we detach it from DCAT, so it's just another namespace, semantic namespace. I mean, in my understanding, semantic interoperability can be accomplished internally in a semantic namespace, but if we build things in different namespaces, then they don't interoperate each other anymore too much. We still need APIs to communicate. So this is kind of my, sorry, maybe not so well organized thoughts and feedbacks.
So just to comment on the last one, actually, ADMS-AP has not the intent, well, it could be, but that's a choice, to disconnect from DCAT, so on. So this is the usage of ADMS in a DCAT context. And now it has been defined historically in the DCAT context of JoinUp. And the semantic assets aspect, as Georgia has shown, is maybe less present in this profile. Whereas if you look to the Italian specification, it's the first thing that you get hits in the face. It's actually a lot of properties that are specific to semantic assets, like the number of actions, how many properties are there in this vocabulary, etc. So these are the lot of the kind of focus differences between the two on it, if you look to it from an outsider. So our question that we have, and this is indeed, thank you for that explanation, that there is a road ahead for JoinUp where there is maybe only a subset or a part of it that would fits this profile. And that's the question is how we go forward for this, and what is the collaboration on that, and is that something different as the topic that's shown here, this profile, the Italian profile, maybe that targets a different audience, a different element. Maybe it's the same, but that I would like to explore with you as a community on the table, where we put our efforts and where we find, let's say, community around to go forward.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So, Bert, your next question.
Thanks.
Yeah. So my question is, the question apart from these two, let's say, testimonials of usage, are there other around the table that have do actively use ADMS or ADMS-AP, just to know, because these we are not aware of. So these are, let's say, critical stakeholders for ADMS-AP, but maybe there are some others around the table that
next slide.
Okay, we use. I don't see nothing in the chat.
Put your next slide on. Put your next slide on.
Has Irini or Max, who is? Sorry.
Put your next slide on.
The next slide. Okay, yeah. Okay, good. But that was it. Yeah.
Well, are there anyone who has knowledge of the ADMS implementations, ADMS-AP implementations? This, we found out this is the problem that we have, of course, if you publish an open specification to find out who is actually using it. We have those two that we know, but we really want to get into contact with people who do use ADMS-AP.
In the data.europa.eu, we use still ADMS. We use it for the dataset, the ADMS identifier, the ADMS status, the things that were covered, the version notes. For the distribution, we also use status and representation technique.
But you're using some of the ADMS properties?
Yes. ADMS identifier for the dataset, ADMS status, again for the dataset, for the DCAT dataset type, ADMS version notes.
So this was actually in the context of what Bert said earlier, that what we see in the use of ADMS is not, it's wider than actually using ADMS, it's using some of the properties for some purposes. And you're saying that the data.europa.eu also uses some of the ADMS properties, but not ADMS-AP as a complete profile.
What do you mean as a complete profile? No, we don't. No, only just those 4 or 5 properties. The other, whatever can be covered otherwise, we use DCAT.
Yeah. So basically, you're using ADMS properties in the context of a DCAT-AP profile.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We see that same holds for Norway, and that case mentions that indeed that's one of the reasons, saying there were no recent updates, there was no activities, and do we trust it enough to be used? So this is that's a part of it, of the challenge of the road forward that we wanted to do, that we provide at least a trust that you can use those terms and address questions to it. So hopefully, at least in the terminological sense, we can address that, but not the AP is used so much. So,
but Peter Brun has an interesting comment there. They use the ADMS only and not the AP. What do you mean? Do you use ADMS with ADMS asset and things like that, like the ADMS-AP profile #1? Or how do you use ADMS? Can you explain that?
Yeah. We pick the elements that we need in a given context. We don't use the AP as such. Let's say.
And you're using in the context of an application profile with DCAT or
Yes,
things like that?
as an example, yes, with DCATs, the Danish version of DCAT-AP.
Okay. So you're not using the AP, you're using some of the properties of ADMS in other contexts.
Exactly.
Okay. And Jim was the same. Okay, so for the time being, also in this call, we don't hear of any other implementation apart from the one that Kees Troutwijn says that they're looking into the using ADMS. Is that ADMS-AP or also more on the level of properties? Kees?
We did not yet decide on that because, well, because of the lack of updates. We noticed that it was all really old. So we were interested, but well, it's on the back burner because of that. Because we will not invest in something that is no longer maintained. So we did not make any decisions yet, or just using the ADMS or ADMS-AP, or we did not make that decision yet.
And what was the use case or the topic of the domain in the area that you considered ADMS looking at as vocabulary or?
Well, there are several. For one, describing high value data, because we have a central role in the Netherlands, so we wanted to express that in a way that people are more that's more easily to find reusable resources. That was one aspect. The other one, but I think I was mistaken about that, is I had the impression that there's a difference between DCAT and ADMS in that if you use DCAT to describe something, you are expected to share that resource, right? If you make a distribution or a data service, it's more or less expected that in some way you are going to share that. And we were having the use case that we just want to describe it for internal use. So not necessarily as a data service or distribution, but just to make chunks of useful data in our own knowledge graph. And I had the impression for a while that ADMS was more useful for that without the expectation of having to share it immediately. But I'm not so sure now if that's still the case. So maybe I was mistaken on the second part.
Maybe that was part of the original, let's say, use case, or it's not never written in at least in the text.
No,
it
it's
could
not.
be in the mind of the designers and the working groups that was around the table at that time, but it's not written down, and neither on DCAT. So you find this is left in the air. Let's say it's up to you as a user to decide on that.
There's no implication that you, when you use DCAT or ADMS, that you must share the information. Even there were cases where we discussed at DCAT this description of closed data using DCAT. And the good thing, of course, is if you do that, use the same standards to describe it, then at some point, if you have some closed data and you want to open it up, you don't have to redesign and redevelop, but you can just use because you're using the same standard. I see also one point from Ana Rosa that also in Spain, ADMS-AP is used to federate solutions with join-up. And I think that in that sense, I think the usage of join-up of ADMS-AP comes also with some implementations in member states that provide solutions to join-up. I think that's sort of the complex of the usage of ADMS-AP at join-up comes with member state implementations as well.
Are there others doing this? Maybe Italo, I don't know if you have other knowledge of that other member states are sharing or using a variant of ADMS-AP to provide or to fill in the catalog or the join-up content.
Well, yes. I mean, not other member states. I've been told maybe there is a Ilias here that can provide more information, but I made some survey, yes, to understand. It looks that, I mean, we do have an ADMS importer, but it worked twice in 2019, and that's it. Okay, for the Spanish catalog. The Slovenian one, there was an attempt, I've been told. So indeed, we don't have an ongoing federation import process in JoinUp.
Okay.
What I've said. Yeah, basically that's the problem. Also, another issue on this is that it doesn't support updates. So if I want to import something to update something that is existing, is not supported this, and this could be an issue because I mean, you can import something once and then it detach from the source, maybe becomes misaligned. As far as I know, I don't know if Ilias has more information about this.
Well, no, on that, we do support updates. We do support, like the 2 times that Spain has imported. The second one was an update of the previous version.
Okay.
I think that we don't support that if you already had created manually these solutions on our website, that you can convert them to an imported one. However, it's not that hard to implement. It's just that we didn't have a use case for that yet. But for updating, yeah, the importer does support this.
Okay.
Thanks, Ilias,
Cool.
for specification.
Thanks for the feedback. Yeah, indeed, that clarifies things. Okay. I have a question, and so we have these 2 kind of use cases and so on. Taking the one of the Italian case, is the community around the table having interest into creating a profile for semantic assets and lifting the properties that Italy has discovered and described up to the European level? Is there an interest around the table to do that kind of activity? I don't know if you have felt the same need for having collection of metadata. If not, it's fine. Just to know, it's just for us to know what to go ahead if we take an initiative in that area or not. Okay. Thank you very much. So I don't think the silence means that there's no imminent activity on it. So it's less the implementation, Rita. It's more the knowledge. So saying that you describe in depth an ontology, describe in depth controlled vocabulary at metadata level.
But I think Georgia shared the link.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to have more information about it, then you can go there. I saw it was in Italian only. Is it only
No, ADMS-AP should be also in English.
Okay.
At least all the labels and comments, I think. I'm not sure because we did this some years ago. But yeah, obviously the schema.gov.it, the catalog is in Italian only. Yes.
Okay.
How imminent need to provide more details or further development of ADMS-AP at the moment?
Okay. So that's a conclusion for now, I think. Yeah. So if you feel the need on that and you say there's a need, then we can collaborate with Italy to see and to take that knowledge up and to work on that. So raise an issue or contact to us. For the same is with join-up, saying the usage of ADMS-AP as in the context of join-up, that we will sit together, Italo and Elias, to see what is the future on that, what is the scope of where it sits. Because yeah, you feel that we have to find the right balance and how to formulate it on it. That has as a consequence, of course, that the future of ADMS-AP as it stands now is still in the air, in the sense of we don't have yet decided which direction to go, but there's at this moment not a clear direction. Where to go, what does it mean, this ADMS-AP, for which is the use case or what is the target audience?
Can I say something again?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I add something also in relation with what Georgia mentioned? It will be very interesting to understand, maybe I'm missing something, for sure I'm missing something. I mean, for the future of this profile, semantic profile, it will be interesting to realign, in my opinion, on what is going to be stored with these. So align on the needs, on the information that needs to be assigned to these assets or semantic assets, and align on what the Italian experience is doing with Georgia just showed quickly, and what join-up can still do on the interoperable solution side. And in doing this, we could then strengthen and force the adoption of this data model, okay, ADMS, AP, or the way we wanted to call it. On the other side, also in Italy, there is this kind of dichotomy. We see that there is the Developers Italia experience that looks like detached from Georgia experience, is the open source software catalog, where they're using this public code YAML. How it relates with the assets you were mentioning, Georgia, these open source software, are you working together with them, or is a parallel context that can have sense to me? Because in Join Up, we are facing the same kind of scenario somehow, okay? That's it. I don't know if what I said makes sense to you. I'm pretty new here.
No, yeah, it makes sense. No, it's just to clarify. Yeah, first of all, I'm working with the Department of Digital Transformation in Italy of the Presidents of the Council of Ministers, and we have different national platforms, let me say. One platform is developers for software. Okay, so software means solutions that public administrations can reuse, okay, when they have the same needs, okay. But then there is all the platforms around the data, like the Open Data Catalog. Open Data Catalog is based on DCAT-AP. Or then we have the National Catalog of Semantic Assets to support semantic interoperability. And so we have controlled vocabularies that are data sets, okay, as also probably in Norway. We have ontologies, okay, more or less complicated, let me say. And then, and these are documented using ADMS-AP, essentially. And then we have, and since this is based on DCAT-AP, there is a connection between all of these that I mentioned. And then there is the schema APIs. We are still working on that. It's an ongoing work, but also schema API is like the schema to document APIs for software. Okay, so these are actually the main concepts and the main platforms that are somehow connected all together. And the basic stuff is to describe them in a certain way with the same metadata.
Very interesting. Yes.
And to give a connection, so most of the work on ADMS and DCAT is indeed, as Georgia mentions, around the notion of a data set, a collection of information, whereas software that you mentioned, is a slightly different grouping, and it does something, and in the end you want to do something with that software. So the metadata collecting of that is typically left at this moment out of scope in this area, knowing that it exists and that it somehow uses these data sets and these or supports or builds these services, but there's no direct connection. And that is maybe where this can be happening, and say, okay, in order to realize this data service, you use this software or this code.
Exactly. That's great. Yeah, I mean, it is very, very important starting from this kind of analysis in eventually refactoring, revamping the data model. I mean, it should start from an update of the requirement. Which are the requirements? Because in my understanding, at the beginning, ADMS-AP was built to store semantic assets that could be also software, could be, yes, software solution. That's why it was also introduced as releases and whatever. Nowadays is not the case anymore. Mostly, okay, because who really wants to store software into join-up, software code base? No, nobody. Okay, so it's mostly now a matter of referencing assets that are still outside, okay, for software and open source software. But still, maybe join-up, other catalogs want to be the library, the information owners. In this case, in my opinion, semantics and these profiles have a great application. So probably we need to retune on the storage needs of interoperable solution / semantic assets and maybe open source software on the other hand. So, and based on this, maybe revamp the ADMS IP, or maybe unified with DCAT-AP if it could end up in a kind of duplication. I don't know. You are the expert here. I'm not.
But that's indeed the goal, and the word we kept in the discussion the wording of the names of the vocabularies and the application profile as is. But this is one of the, let's say, underlying things. Of course, if we have a better scope, then we create a better name for the document and this agreement. That's something that we felt, but I leave it out because we don't know what is the scope for which document we are talking now. So I don't want to propose any new names yet. But that is one of, let's say, the maintenance aspects that we discussed internally in the team as well. Saying, okay, we are not clear with the name, which scope you expect to read in the document. So
I have a question here about, and everyone else. It's I think one of the things we really need to look at the definition of assets and asset distribution. If you're storing like software, will there be only one distribution? Most likely, according to the current definition, because the definition says that these are to be considered different physical representations. I think it says or something. It's based on the Ferber approach of looking at things. Yeah. I had this situation where I needed to find a way of expressing information about specifications. And I looked at DCAT and I said, no, this is wrong. Because if I want to describe a specification, it will contain a schema, a user documentation, maybe good examples, maybe a vocabulary and so on. All of these are not different representations of the same thing. It's a collection of assets that somehow you need to define to belong together. That's why we went with prof instead. Because prof defines like a profile or a specification which have resources. So it has a has-resource relationship. So it corresponds to something like a collection. But if I didn't find that one, I would probably have gone with ADMS instead. And I would have been in conflict with the actual semantics of ADMS, because each asset is not a collection of resources. It's different distributions. So what I would like to know, are we in agreement of this interpretation of asset and asset distribution, or are we actually just using ADMS and tweaking it into our liking or what we actually need. We need a way of collecting a couple of resources together and calling that an asset instead of defining something else.
Good question. So this comes to the real content of what is ADMS about, Matthias?
Yes, I'm keeping on it. I think that is the question we need to answer.
Maybe I can answer that question about ADMS because I wrote that first one. The idea was that a asset has a distribution, and all the distribution are the same, and they only are different formats. Which basically is the same model that was inherited into DCAT.
Okay,
and
I suspected as much.
Where the ADMS-AP was adapted for join-up, what was added was a release which has assets which have distributions. So that was the fourth level that was shown by Bert in his slide, which was a release, was also a type of data set on the same level. So it was the same thing that now happens in DCAT, where there was a addition of another level, which is the dataset series, was also included in the DCAT, in the ADMS-AP for join up, but in a different way. So within the boundaries of what was already there. So this was the original idea. Whether that has been applied in all cases is, I don't know, but the idea was that it has the same structure as in DCAT. A distribution is a expression of the data set, or in this case for the asset, and you can have multiple formats for the same asset, but they're all the same thing.
But Max, can you please then tell me why didn't you just go with Dublin Core? Because a lot of things can be done with Dublin Core directly. Why was a new vocabulary?
Anything with Dublin Core, but there's these classes of having the conceptual asset versus the implementation in a distribution is something that was added in the model. That is not, Dublin Core is really open. You can do anything with anything.
Yes, yes.
But there is no real sort of class
instance relationship. Yes.
That was what the idea of ADMS, and that was also done in DCAT at the same time.
So what you're saying is that the core of ADMS is this asset distribution relationship,
yeah.
And that is why it exists.
Yeah.
And then that is something we should really think about if that is needed now.
Yeah. Yeah. And then and I think what Italo said also, you need to actually look at the requirements before you can actually decide how to do them. And ADMS, the original version, was done specifically to build a catalog of semantic assets, which member states would contribute their descriptions, which was why it is as it is. And then afterwards, the introduction of software to be described with ADMS was an extension of that. But the original one was sort of simple one. You have semantic assets, you want to share them, you want to build a catalog of them, and then you submit and you harvest those descriptions into join-up.
So if we look at a bit of a revisionist history perspective, Max, if DCAT would have introduced the DCAT resource as a more generic resource class before, would ADMS have existed?
That's a question I don't know. Revisionist, ADMS existed before DCAT. ADMS existed before DCAT was standardized, so they were developed in parallel. So you never know.
Okay, but another approach of looking at this would be to say, okay, how many are actually using the classes asset, asset distribution, and asset repository? The properties, we know that they are reused, but how many actually reuse the classes? And that gives us an indication of how the profile, if it's needed or not.
I think what we just said was the join up one, the catalog, and the IT, the Italian one. And I also think Willem van Gemen made a comment that also in publications office there is some usage of ADMS which uses the classes. So those currently I think we know those 3 that actually use it. And even then the one at join up doesn't actually use ADMS asset anymore. That actually, that application profile directly uses DCAT dataset. and DCAT distribution.
Okay, so if we then say we will need this application profile for the future, then I would argue we need 2 more properties to connect the asset with the asset distribution and the asset repository with the asset. Otherwise, it feels very stumped if we are not to reuse the DCAT, if we are going to make it independent.
But that's the question there is we then need to actually identify the requirements and then see how that can be implemented. And I think that would be something. But the question is, do we want to go there? Is there an interest in actually putting to put in that effort to do that? And I'm not quite sure what the answer is. Bert, have you a view on that?
At this moment, I have the feeling that for, let's say, there's too little concrete motivation for a profile to be built at this moment, if I feel it around on the table. So that makes it difficult to go forward into it. We can argue on the level of the vocabulary, Matthias. You say, okay, in order to make the vocabulary, let's say, more coherent reading as it is, and we add these 2 properties just to ensure that the story can be told better as a new ones onto it, and that's it.
Let's discuss that on GitHub, because I think we have to close the. We have another 3 minutes to the end, so that conclusion that we can discuss further the 2 properties for the ADMS vocabulary, and that for the ADMS-AP we just don't have enough, I think, at the moment, interest to further develop that. But there's also a point that we can discuss, I think, on GitHub, because we also have a GitHub collection for ADMS-AP.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me just say one very, very quick thing. SCOS and OWL, the relation of SCOS is much simpler. Maybe ADMS could be considered a simpler version of Ferber.
It is, to a large extent it is. But then we have to look to the definitions a bit. But indeed,
Sure.
we picked 3 out of the 4 layers.
Yep.
Okay, so we move to the wrap-up.
Yeah, okay. So what we have discussed today was an agreement to make ADMS back again a maintained broad vocabulary in collaboration with W3C. So where SEMIC takes the editorial role on its own. That we go for a future roadmap for the controlled vocabularies to move the maintenance from the SEMIC team to the EU Vocabularies team. And that for ADMS-AP, that we have no direct impact, so we don't have to change anything on it, but that we don't have yet, that was my anticipated conclusion already, a clear forward direction to go. So I had hoped not to do that, but that was my expectation already. So suggestions are always welcome. What it is to do, so we will share, William and Jitse, can you share the GitHub links again? So so that they are at the bottom. Any comments you can give to GitHub on the vocabulary. We have prepared already the spec in nice reading and so on. So that's the reason why we put now a month of public review on it, so that it's a bit kind of fresh, so that we can have a closure or a version of this one quickly out. So we have, I think the main topic is these 2 additional properties to be discussed, to make the story online on that. And in further on, so if you have any other feedback on the vocabulary or on the controlled vocabularies, so if you look to the controlled vocabularies, then you can have maybe some, say, additional notes or improvements over there, so that we get a refreshed on that. And at the level of ADMS-AP, of course, there we, if you have any feedback or suggestions, we are welcome to do and to go discuss this further.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this all. I would like to as well to thank W3C for the collaboration, by the way. I don't know if Pierre-Antoine is on the call, but
No, unfortunately he's not.
it's worked out fine.
Yes, yes. On my behalf, I would like to thank you all for attending the meeting and contributing. Your contribution is very valuable, and you understand the reason we are asking this is because we want, as a SEMIC community, to evolve, to to provide updated models that are useful for our stakeholders. Correct any mistakes that and shortcomings that appeared due to old assumptions that are not valid anymore. And we will kindly ask you to provide as much as feedback as possible in order for us to keep this effort going on, and always update our vocabularies. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.
I have a question for someone from SEMIC. Who should I ask? Could I stay on and ask?
You can ask us.
I was in a meeting with the Nordic SDG people this morning.
Yes, sir.
And seems to be a lot of work going on with defining the evidence, a lot of different kind of evidence for birth and various kind of educational proofs and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 2 big tables with a lot of different lists of properties, more or less. And
you're referring to the work that Niels is conducting.
Yes, probably. I don't know the names. I was just wondering whether there is. And Rita presented from Finland the work with Tito Mallit, how they started to model this using core vocabularies properties. And it seems like there should be some work by someone centrally to start mapping these evidence properties to common properties. Is there any work on this? And I don't know who Niels is. I'm not.
Nismal Garth, it is the person that is responsible for the evidence mapping process. Let me share.
So there's basically 3 areas in OTS in SDG. There is one group that looks at requirements. There is one group that looks at semantic standards, and one group that does the technical implementation. And those 3 work together. And Niels McGrath is the person who works with the member states to identify the requirements for each of the procedures. So now the issue is that we find out that the commonality between different countries is not that great, of course. And what we've tried in the past is trying to build models for each of those evidences. That didn't work that well. So what we're currently doing in OTS, we're using existing standards. So for example, for vehicle information, we're using the Eu standard, which is already an XML schema that you can use and that many countries use. For education, we're looking at MREX ELMO, which is a standard that is being used especially in the northern countries. And we're not currently doing new models. So we're not mapping any of those models to existing core vocabularies, for example. And for the birth and those kind of the life event, there is a public document directive from the Justice DG. So currently, I think we are right, but what we know we have to do is to match those requirements to more specific schemas. What we're currently doing is we're mapping into like already existing chunks of standards. And the way that we're wanted to do, let's say, the modeling exercise that you're talking about, hit the roadblock that there is nowhere that those things are mandatory for member states to implement. So if member states want to do that, they're free to do that. But if they think it's too expensive or difficult, they're not obliged to do it. So in that sense, we came from that, let's say, from the ground up, looking at the data models for the requirements towards a sort of an easier approach to do what is already there. And so that's, I don't know what in Finland people are doing, mapping things to core vocabularies, is currently not on the agenda for OTS for this year. Does that answer some of your question?
Rita is here.
Yes, I'm here. I just happened to hear that. So I think that we have discussed with Seth van Holland with our system also, and with Niels also, so that we have presented our implementation from to two different directorates or programs, or what I don't know the exact term, but anyways, both Niels and Seth know about this. And I think that it was back in the days when SG started, that when they said that they should use core vocabularies to when they describe the evidences, but that was in the old times. But anyway, we think that that was a very interesting approach, so that we tested that approach, so that's not, we have done some demonstrations, but not fully functional, of course, because the SDG evidences are still in progress, because as you said, that there are requirements, but not the exact formats of the evidences. They are not yet established.
Yeah, it just seems like low-hanging fruit to start mapping at least a few of these properties from these evidences to common vocabularies. I was just wondering if anyone was doing it, except you in Finland already, Rita. So
yep.
I think it would be a nice exercise to do after the fact, even though if it cannot be done as a modeling exercise before, but rather when you come to stabilize the models to say that these are the common properties that most should have. What we are seeing in Sweden, I talked with someone before lunch about this, and they said that we have a lot of different agencies that say we don't have this information, but they are very strict in how they interpret individual properties. So maybe the way to go here is to be a bit more, what does it mean to have not a birth date, but maybe when you got your educational degree? Maybe the semantics of them need to be a bit more flexible, and then you can make it happen. Anyway, it felt like this should be an exercise for SEMIC.
For the future.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think we need to run now, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Yes,
sorry.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Taking your time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.